All right, so let's talk about biscuit joiners for a minute and what they actually are, what they're useful for. There's a lot of thought out there on if they're even useful at all for joinery in particular. And the first thing you have to remember with a biscuit joint itself, it's not the strongest joint in the world. And the reason I say that is because you're basically cutting slots into the wood itself. And then you're going to use what's actually a biscuit, which is a piece of material that you can actually buy at lots of places, including Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, that actually gets inserted into this slot. Okay, so after you've run your biscuit, and I'll show you really quick how you set up the biscuit joiner and how you use it, especially on we're not doing plane to plane, we're actually running vertical, obviously, end panels for the TV stand we're doing. So this is a biscuit right here. That biscuit gets glued and set into that joint, okay? And then I'm making 3 of these for each panel, and then that goes into the joint I make on the other stock, and it's glued down and set in there. And I actually glue the bottom of these too. Now, it's not strong because you can see it's just a piece of material. I mean, it's going to hold everything in place, and it's nice for locking it into the flush edge of the material. But overall, it's not going to be the strongest because it's not being held together by screws, nails, or whatever. Glue is a great bonding agent if you're using the right kind of glue, but as far as joinery joints go, this is not the strongest joint there is. That being said, with this actual furniture piece that I'm making, this TV stand, I'm doing this to square everything up the way I want it with the biscuit joints and hold it in place. And then I'm actually going to have little 90-degree L angles that go into the furniture that are actually going to hold it in place as far as structure goes for weight and movement and all the stuff that happens with furniture. So these joints are usually, I make them for putting end stocks together, so making, putting pieces together to make a longer tabletop or whatever. For box joints, so we're doing, horizontal to vertical application that's being tied together. I don't say this is the only thing you should use most of the time. Sometimes I've even done that and then set some finish nails on the end. The problem with going with joinery on the ends here is that this stuff in particular, because it's actually laminated together, can split. So you have to be careful with using a biscuit joint as your only method of adhering 2 pieces of stock together. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about the biscuit joiner itself. All right, so here's a biscuit joiner itself. This is actually a pretty simple tool to use. It's got a lot of room for error. So for like the DIY projects and the beginning woodworking that people are getting into, it's actually a pretty easy tool to use and to set up. First things first, the way it cuts the joint itself is it's actually a plunging tool. So what that means is when you pull the trigger, you let it speed up, and then there's actually springs back here that when you push against the material, you actually plunge it in there, and you can see that blade now comes out, right? So that blade sticks out, and when the machine is running, that blade is spinning horizontally this way, and it just basically burrows that joint in, and then you release it, you come out, let go of the trigger, and you've got your biscuit joint, okay? That's kind of how the machine works itself, the tool works itself. Now, every biscuit joiner has what's a guard as well, okay? And this guard can come down to lots of different angles in between to help you level the tool itself out. We're gonna lock it at 90 degrees, and then you have to set up the tool itself to get the middle of the stock lined up for every one of your joints. What I mean by that, we're using 1/2 inch material for this particular project. There's some examples here. So what I do is you take the material, you set it flat on the ground, Okay? Then you set the machine itself, the tool itself up, flush with your surface that you're setting the stock on. And then there's adjustments. This one in particular has adjustments on this side to lower this guard so it's flush with the top of this material, and that will help line up that biscuit blade, okay? So I loosen this thing up, and then I set it down, flush against the stock, okay? And then what I do is, and I'll flip it around so you can see it this way. Flush against the stock here, okay? Get the cord out of the way. And then there's a gap here, so what I need to do is I need to take this wheel adjustment and I raise it down until that's now tight to the top of the material, okay? When I've got it nice and level, that looks good, I just go ahead and tighten into place, lock it in, and now that joint will dive right into the middle of the material when I plunge it through, okay? So then the next thing you want to do is now with smaller materials, it's a little easier to go with the hand, and you push up against it. You pull the trigger to let it speed up. Don't plunge it in right away. If you're pushing on this machine itself, as it's revving up, this can actually kick out because it's grabbing the material before it's sped up. So what you want to make sure safety-wise is hold down on your machine, but don't push the plunging mechanism yet. Just pull the trigger, and once it's sped up, you can go ahead and push it in, let it go all the way in, and then pull back out, okay? Then you've made your biscuit joint. That's how you do the horizontal piece, so the piece that's laying flush. Now, the trick with doing the stock that we're building here, where we have a vertical piece joining a horizontal piece, is we've got to be able to plunge into this material on the face as opposed to on the edge for the other piece, right? How do you do that? Well, you have to come in from this side and plunge it. Now you can see that's a little bit tricky. Several ways to do this. Again, with smaller material where I'm not clamping a bunch of stuff down, it's not a huge sheet that I'm using. What I tend to do is just take a scrap piece of wood, or you can even make a jig itself, okay? The fence has to come up out of the way, lock it in place, okay? Because the machine is going to be flush with the edge of the material. So I take it flush here, and then what I do is I take my piece of scrap and I push it up against the edge of that board, okay? So now it's flush against it, and same thing goes. You want to have your hand against this stock, and another way to do this is again to build a jig, or you can clamp it in place if you want, if you don't feel comfortable holding it. But you flush it up against the edge, flush the back of the machine up against the edge on all sides, okay? And the same thing, you pull the trigger, don't push down while you're starting it up because it'll kick out on you. Pull the trigger and then go ahead and plunge it down and back up, and you've made your joint. Now, how do you determine where the joint goes? Very simple. You basically get to pick your own spot. Again, it's a machine that's a tool that's easy to use. So this piece is going vertically, meeting this piece, okay? So what I'm gonna do is lay these two pieces together, make sure my edges are flush, this side and this side, and then I just go ahead and make my marks. And for this piece, I'm actually making 3 biscuits. So you don't want to be too far to the edge because this can actually split out and show. So you want to be far enough in where the machine's not going to burrow through and expose that edge. One here, and somewhere in here. Okay, so now those edges are marked on both pieces. And I can go ahead, I just carry those marks down. Okay, that's where I know to make the edge biscuit. And these I just carry down to this edge, and I'll show you why. There and there, okay? So then I can see on the face where I need to make my plunge on that end. Now again, when I was showing you with that scrap material as my brace, makes it my jig to hold this flush, okay? I've got my marks on this edge that'll correspond with the middle of the tool right here. I've got a line on the back of this to plunge down on. So that line lines up with my mark here on this face piece. Same thing on the guard, and some of these aren't as accurate with the guard, but you just got to kind of pay attention to that. lock in place at 90. Same thing. I've got a mark on the actual tool itself here and on this guard itself. And again, I don't always trust these, so I like to use the actual notch in the metal piece of the tool itself as my line, but same concept. I'd have a mark here on this, I'd line it up and then plunge it in, okay? And all you're doing is holding that front piece and pushing. Again, making sure you pull the trigger before you start plunging so it doesn't kick out on you. All right, so that's a simple way to make biscuit joints with that joiner, and that's all you really need to know in order to actually start building them. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue with this, marking all my spots for my biscuits, and I'm gonna keep moving.
Yo, listen. Came to America, real youngster, learned from the OGs, true gangsters. Mistakes I made never gave real answers. Then the problems came along, disaster. Had strap for what came after. Saw my brothers ghosts like Casper, plowing through my mind like a tractor. What's the reason of life? No laughter. Staying in my lane and the money came faster. Putting food on the table to platter. Anyone in my way I would shatter. Tech was mine like a kung fu master. Rebuke the demons. Josh answers, ain't no faking in me.